Hey, this is Brandon with Pickleball Effect. I wanted to create this video to enable people to find the best pickleball paddle out there that fits their game. I don't think that there's one paddle out there that's best for everyone, but I do think that there's a perfect paddle for every person. There are literally hundreds of paddles out there on the market, and it's really difficult to find one that complements you and your game, especially if this is your first time looking at a performance level paddle. Even for people who have been around for a while, not everyone knows or can read the specs of paddle and know how that paddle is going to play. So I've been reviewing paddles for over a year, and I've learned a bunch of things about the different characteristics and technology that goes into a paddle that makes it perform the way it does. And I wanted to pass this knowledge on to you so that when you're doing your paddle research, you can see past the marketing jargon and understand how a paddle is going to perform before you buy it. Additionally, I've advised a ton of people on buying paddles and finding a paddle that fits them, and I've developed this paddle quiz that will narrow down the specs and the characteristics of a paddle that makes sense for you and match the things that you want out of the paddle. And so I'll share that paddle quiz with you at the end. But before we dive into that stuff, I do have a gift for you, so I want you to stay until the end of the video and I'll share that gift. So when you're looking at the specs of a paddle, there's 5 things you want to pay attention to. There's the core, the face, the shape, the weight, and the handle length. So the first thing being the core. There's 2 components of the core you'll want to look at. There's the core material and then the core thickness. The core material is more than likely going to be a polymer core. 90% of the paddles out there have a polymer core, and that's because they have a nice balance of power and control. Sometimes you'll see a Nomex core, which is known for having a little more power and a little less control. And then there's a brand called Gearbox that uses 100% carbon fiber core. It's kind of in a category of its own, but those are the 3 materials are going to be 90% of paddles are polymer. But more importantly, you want to pay attention to the thickness of a paddle. So the thickness of the paddle is usually measured in millimeters. You'll see a range from 10 millimeters all the way up to 19 millimeters. When you're going across the spectrum, the thicker the paddle typically means more control, more touch at the sacrifice of some power. And then the thinner the paddle typically means more power and less control. And then of course, anything that lands in the middle is going to be some mix of the two. So the second thing you want to look at is the facing material. There's 2 primary materials that are being used right now. That's fiberglass and carbon fiber. Fiberglass is known for giving you a little more power. It's a little jumpier off the face, but they do have a smaller sweet spot. Carbon fiber in general is known for having a little more control, more feel, but at the sacrifice of some power. Now when you're shopping around for paddles, you're going to see a $50 paddle that has a carbon fiber face, and you're going to see a $200 paddle that has a carbon fiber face. Not all carbon fiber is equal. There's different qualities of carbon fiber that manufacturers use, and there's also a variety of ways you can arrange the carbon fiber that will give you different performance. But in general, a carbon fiber face is going to offer you more control and touch over a fiberglass one. So the third thing you want to pay attention to is the shape of the paddle. When we're looking at kind of the spectrums of shapes, there's elongated paddles on one end and wide body paddles on the other. So as an example, this is a wide body paddle. They're a little shorter and a little wider. So when your paddle is shaped like this, the sweet spot is going to sit in the middle of the paddle. You're generally going to have a larger sweet spot, and it's going to be more forgiving. And so people associate wide body paddles with defense because it's easier to block. You have a little more room to work with when you're being defensive. And then on the other side, you have elongated shaped paddles. So this is an example of an elongated shape. So this is the Mach 6 from Selkirk. This is 16.5 inches long, which is the typical elongated shape. There are some that are longer, but they're going to be right around that range. So an elongated shape is going to have a sweet spot that's higher up on the face. It's going to offer you a little more power than a wide body, but it is going to be a little less forgiving, especially from side to side. And then of course, there's a bunch of paddles that kind of sit in between those two that have a mix of kind of control and power. So the next thing we want to look at is handle length. You'll see handle lengths from a range of about 4.5 inches all the way up to 6 inches. So the shorter the handle, the more paddle surface you get to work with, but it does have a little less leverage and is not as quick in your hands. A longer handle is going to give you room for 2-handed shots, It's going to give you a little more leverage. It's going to be a little quicker in your hands. There are a lot of players that like to put their finger up on the paddle, so those people are going to want shorter handles. Depending on your play style will determine the handle length you want. So longer handle means more leverage, more power. Shorter handle means more control and more paddle surface. The next thing you want to look at is weight. So weight will range anywhere from about 7 ounces to 8.5 ounces. So the lighter range is going to make the paddle quicker in your hands, and offer a little less power. They say that a lighter paddle is easier to control, but I don't always agree with that. A heavier paddle is going to give you a little more stability, a little more swing weight to carry through the paddle and give you more power. And then of course the weights in the middle are going to give you kind of that all-court playability. Along with the actual weight of the paddle, you want to look at the weight distribution of it. So some paddles are head heavy, some paddles are head light. A head heavy paddle is going to give you a little more power, and it's going to feel heavier in your hands. Head light paddle is going to have a little more weight in the handle. It's going to be quicker in your hands, but it's going to offer a little less power. So now that we understand how the specs of a paddle will influence the playability of it, let's take a look at this paddle quiz that I've developed to kind of narrow down the characteristics of a paddle that makes sense for you. So there's 3 questions I'm going to ask you, and depending on how you answer them, will give you an idea of the type of paddle and characteristics that you want. So the first question is, do you value control or power more? If you value control, then you're going to look for paddles with carbon fiber faces and that have a thicker core. And if you value power more, you're going to look for paddles with an elongated shape, have a fiberglass face, and have a thinner core. The second question you should ask is, do you value reach more or do you value forgiveness? If you value reach, then you're going to want an elongated shape. If you value forgiveness, then you're going to want a wide body shape. The third question you should ask yourself is, do you value power or paddle speed? If you value power, then you're going to want a head heavy paddle or something that's just a little heavier in general. If you value paddle speed, then you're going to want something that's lighter. So now that you've answered those questions, it narrows down the characteristics and things that you're looking for, the specs that you're looking for of a paddle that fits your play style. Now it's time to go do some research and demo a few paddles. One of the best resources you have for research is my website. If you go to pickleballeffect.com, you can find reviews for over 50 paddles that I've thoroughly tested. I've also recently dropped a list that identifies the best paddles that I've reviewed in 3 different categories. So I have the best control paddles, the best power paddles, and the best all-court paddles that I've played. None of this is sponsored. This is just my own opinion of the best paddles I reviewed in those categories. So go check out that list, find a couple paddles that fit the specs of the paddle that's going to fit your game, and then it's time to demo them. So if you have a pickleball store near you, that's a great place to go demo paddles. If you don't have that resource, you can always go online. I like to go to fromwithpickleball.com. This is also where that gift is that I mentioned earlier. If you go to From with Pickleball and you use the discount code 10effect, you can get 10% off of nearly every paddle on their website. Some exclusions do apply, but for the most part, if you find the paddle you like, you can get 10% off. Additionally, Frometh has a program that lets you return paddles that you don't like. So let's say you buy a couple paddles to demo, you pick one over the other, you can return one of them within 30 days and they'll take it even if it's used, as long as it's still in its original condition and you haven't altered it at all. So go to fromwithpickleball.com. It's a great place to demo paddles and to get 10% off using that discount code 10effect. So full disclosure, I do get a little kickback if you use that code, but honestly, I'm just happier I can give you that discount code versus the kickback that I get. It's not a ton, it's just enough to support me in these videos that I make. That's everything I have for you. Thanks for watching. Please comment below with any questions you have about the paddle research you're doing. I'm happy to help any way I can. I'll answer any questions you guys leave in the comments. And of course, if you like this video, please subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Lots of more content coming your way. Thanks.